Yeah,
Hit it.
All right, we're turning the record on.
Okay, we'll call the Planning Commission of City of Walker meeting to order here, September 21st, 2022. First item of business is review the meeting minutes from September 7th, 2022. If there are no changes or updates, please a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Scott.
Support. Support by Pat.
Support by Pat, sorry. Just brain. Support by Pat. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's passed. Next item on the agenda is general public comment. If you are here and would like to comment, make comments to the Planning Commission on items that are not on the agenda tonight, please approach the podium and make your comments. Please hold it to 3 minutes or less. Seeing that there are none, we will move on. Case number 4-1, item number 4-1, case 22-028, courtesy site plan review, 1401 Ferndale Southwest, Covenant Christian High School, classroom addition. Frank?
All righty. Well, good evening, everybody. And I don't know if you heard, but our planner resigned, so I'll be filling in until we get a new one. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have someone on board and helping you out again. So I tend to be a little bit brief on these presentations. So what I would ask to do is I'll go through a couple of things. We have the applicants here, obviously. Scott has his report, but I will not get into any great detail. I would prefer to respond to questions and keep things moving, if that's okay with you folks. Now, what I can say about Covenant Christian is they're proposing to add 4 classrooms, and I'll let the applicants talk about that. From a procedural standpoint, under Michigan law, the Planning Commission is fairly limited on what falls under your review as far as zoning goes. It really comes down to things like signage, parking, stormwater. That's really about it. We don't get into the building itself or architectural review or any of that kind of stuff. So my staff report is fairly brief. And it essentially says this is a courtesy review. It appears that the building that they're proposing, the addition, lines up with the existing building, so the setbacks are the same. And then parking, we'll let you folks talk about that, particularly for overflow. I think there's some issues out there, but I'll get out of the way on that. There is a master plan for this campus, and I'll let you folks talk about that from a development standpoint and maybe some timing. But other than that, I think this is a fairly straightforward zoning review. If they want to do any signage changes, not necessarily driveway signs or interior signs, but things on the exterior, that would fall under a permit, but the interior stuff is completely up to the school. And that's really about it for me on this one. We have 3 slides. We have the master plan, and then we have a zoom in on the 4 additions, or the 4 classroom additions, and then there's a building architectural page. So I can flip back to those as you feel necessary. But I'm going to hand it back to you for Scott's report.
Okay, any questions for Frank initially? Mr. Connors?
3 quick items from us. First off, we want to make sure that the roof outlets from that proposed classroom addition, we want that to flow east into the existing storm sewer and not just flow northwest into what looks like kind of a low area. That would kind of be considered a trespass if we start moving developed water into this undeveloped area that includes the residential properties. So as long as they can handle that, we're good with that. We do want to see a wetland determination, though, at some point to ensure that they're not infringing upon any natural waters there. And then finally, there may be a discussion about parking. The site, we've talked about the site a number of times in the past as they've come in with small expansions, and they do have an existing parking deficiency. The way that they handle that is they have relationships with the church and the school to the south, and they shuttle people in for big events like concerts, like school concerts and big sports venues and things like that. And we're a little bit concerned about how that's impacting Hall Street, for example, to the north. And if you look at the top of the picture, Hall Street is a very narrow road, about 22 feet. And now we have 2 new really nice ball fields up there, plus the track and a pretty small parking lot. And what we're seeing at the city at the traffic committee and the police department level is cars want to park on that street when it gets busy, because if you're a senior, if you're handicapped, you don't want to be dealing with the shuttle and parking half a mile away. You want to get as close as possible. So that may not be a huge discussion for today, but as they look at the new auditorium and new gym, we believe that has to be a pretty important part of that discussion. So we've given them some ideas, and they'll need to try to firm up something, I think, next time around. That's good for us.
Any questions for Scott? Okay, we'll turn it over to.
Sorry, real quick. Scott, on the map here, the checkerboard stuff, the space potential available, was that from us suggesting to them, or is that their suggestion for, on the map here, was that?
I would call that a team effort. We had
Okay.
in site plan review, we discussed it and said that, you know, we wouldn't be too upset if they started using some of their excess field space, like you'd see at a college football game, for example, where, you know, 5 times a year, 6 times a year, you can park in the field. It doesn't really impact the field. So they've kind of firmed that up into a nice idea.
No other questions for Scott? We'll turn it over to the applicant. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you. Kevin Gritters with Prein and Newhof.
Oh, yeah, hit the button on the mic.
There we go.
There you go.
Better? Okay, Kevin Gritters with Prein and Newhof, consulting engineer for the school. So, as has been mentioned, 2 main things that we hope to talk about tonight. First is the classroom addition, which is the short-term improvements that the school is seeking to do. And then secondly is a farther out plan that we're hoping to get some feedback from the commission on tonight about those parking requirements. So I'm available for technical questions. I'd like to turn it over shortly to Rick Norman, who's the school administrator, to give a very brief background on the classroom project. But on the classrooms, before I step away to address the questions, before the roof drainage will be directed more due northerly into that storm sewer there where that low area drains into, where it then heads east. And then wetland determination is scheduled but has not been completed yet. And then thirdly, parking. Nothing additional needed for the classroom addition. Once we finish this brief discussion about the classrooms, I'd like to come back and talk about the overall site, if that's all right with you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Girder?
I've just a compliment for you guys. You're running a good school over there. I've hired 4 or 5 of your alumni, and they're just hard-working kids, and I keep it up. You're turning out some good people there. Thank you.
Good evening. Rick Norman. I'm the principal administrator at the high school. I'm beginning my 26th year there in that position, and I've always appreciated the work of Walker and the cooperation that we've had with Walker in all of our projects. It's really been good. We're kind of proud to be the only high school in Walker, and we hold that very high, I think. So we're really blessed over the last few years and our projections in the coming years of good enrollments. Our enrollments, our feeder schools that come into, feed students into the high school are all growing, and those students are all going to end up with us. We currently, this year, have 387 students. Next year, our projections are about 415, and within 4 or 5 years, we're going to be closing in on 500 students. So this is kind of going to set us up for the classrooms that are necessary to move forward. In addition to the enrollment increases, we're expanding our curriculum as we get bigger. There's more things that we can offer our students. And not in this phase, but in the next phase would be an applied arts facility where we would have a shop and various things set up for that type of the curriculum to expand. So we're thankful for that. This addition that you see now is just 4 basic classrooms. It comes right off from the kind of the natural flow of the school. It really will enhance somewhat, especially the use of our back side for students gathering and so on, because it'll have another entrance access point for them to use in that area. That'll be very nice. And the 4 rooms that are there will be situated in a nice place as far as the traffic of the school and how things all work out. So it's kind of the culmination of the academic wing at that part of the school. So there's nothing really special about the classrooms. The property is in that area is a little bit unique as it starts to, the elevations change. So we're working through that, but that really will, the work of that will have to involve some of the drainage that Kevin talked about, but I think that's very workable. And I think if, in my time at the school, I think this is actually going to enhance the drainage and the, rather than inhibit things there, because we'll be able to get that stuff moving in the right direction sooner, I think, than what it is now. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, then back to the longer-term plan and discussion about parking. So as Mr. Connors mentioned, the school is planning a longer-term, bigger project. Plans are not defined fully for that yet, but some of the big picture goals are a second gymnasium, potentially an auditorium, some other ancillary facilities, and that's shown in that larger purplish color area on the east side of the existing building. So a fairly large addition to the school is the potential there, and that obviously impacts existing parking lot, and also stormwater management would need to be enhanced. So there's a lot more issues at play in that future project. From the school's perspective, we're trying to get some of the requirements bookended here while we're in the early planning processes so that we know what to plan on going forward. And one of the major items is parking. So quickly to address the earlier comment about the Hall Street parking lot, there is a parking lot up there to serve the athletic facilities primarily. The school does have some additional property to the west that the school is already looking at expanding that parking lot there, just because that parking lot gets filled up with activities already. So we are not aware of multiple occasions where there's been parking on Hall Street, but we agree that that is a narrow road that needs to be avoided. So from a big picture perspective, planning for parking, the two main questions that we're hoping to get feedback on are these. Number one, will it be acceptable for the school to continue to use the parking agreements with Hope Church and Hope School, which are the adjacent, not adjacent, nearby sites to the south of the school? That first, and then secondly, does all the on-site parking need to be paved? So that kind of guides or will guide the school's planning processes going forward. Hoping to get some feedback from you on that. Between the church and school nearby, there's 200 parking spaces available. So in the past, the school has counted that 200 towards the school's total provided number of spaces. And then secondly, there was a comment about the hatched area. We obviously recognize a need for parking close to the building and large spaces. And with the addition of the gymnasium, and if there'd be an auditorium, we'd lose a number of spaces right next to the building. We recognize that those would have to be replaced at least with paved spaces in close proximity to the building to serve the seniors and the ADA requirement. So we recognize that. It's really those 2 or 3 times a year, the big events that might need some overflow parking, and wondering about the acceptability of parking in green space that's designated for that. So if it's all right to ask for some discussion on
Okay,
those
any
two
questions,
items.
comments? I do have several. I'm not disagreeing with anything you're doing there. Just wondering, there's six acres to the south of the school right there that's connected, that butts up to the parking lot. That isn't owned by you?
Not sure which area you're talking about.
Due south, right there where the pointer is. That's 6 acres that's connected to the property according to the map. It says Society of Hope Protestant Reformed School Christian Instruction.
That's the Hope School property. That's not the high school property.
Okay, so that's a different,
It's a different entity, yes.
okay. That's what was the question. Then you have 5 acres to the west you mentioned that might do for property. You also have about 6 acres on the corner of Hall and Wilson, it appears, correct?
Corner of Hall and Wilson is almost all wetlands,
Oh, is it? Okay.
yes. So,
Okay, I was just trying to clear that up in my head. There's a lot of land around you. It's just, might not all be useful, so.
right.
Okay, no, I don't, as far as, in my opinion, the classroom's fine. Probably like to see a little more detail once you do start with a second future edition there. So, any other questions or comments? Other than that, I think you've answered our questions and there's no action by the planning commission to be taken, so, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Case number 22-027, public hearing, Northridge West, 3410 4 Mile Road Northwest, rezone from A to MP and MP to IPUD and preliminary site plan review. Frank?
Alrighty, thank you. It looks like you've got a whole team from the applicant side, so I'm going to be brief, and I'll just try to set the stage for you folks. As you said, this is a public hearing to consider the rezoning of the property that you see on the screen that is outlined in blue, both north and south of Northridge Drive, which is complete. And the traffic signal, just as a note, at Northridge and Fruit Ridge is in and functional. If you've been up there, that was a big improvement that we really needed to get done, and it's in and working well. So all of the infrastructure, as far as I know, and Scott can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but all the infrastructure is in place for this project. And this project is almost a mirror image of Northridge East, which is another industrial PUD. So I think it comes down basically to process, and my staff report talks about some of the things that need to be discussed regarding the PASP checklist. The rezoning, in my opinion, is consistent with the master plan. It's certainly consistent with the Northridge East project, and it's something that I think can be a positive recommendation to the City Commission for the rezoning. If you want, I can get into my staff report and go through the list under my staff analysis and recommendations, but I will refer to those as you feel necessary. I don't think there's any deal breakers on there. Essentially, it's a little bit of paperwork that needs to be added to the plans.
Could you just go through them just real quick?
Okay.
A couple words each.
Well, under staff analysis and recommendations, which is on page 3 of my report, there are a few items that are based on the zoning code punch list. And my first bullet is Scott Connors should comment on the need for proposed contours at this level of review. If you look at that piece of property on the aerial image, obviously just looking at the land use, the difference between agriculture and ravines, you know there's some topography on that side, so I'm sure Scott will talk about that. Second bullet point deals with official wetland delineations should be required at the time of final area site plan review for an impacted lot. You can see on that site that there are some wetlands on there that go along with the ravines. And third bullet point, notes 7 and 9 under development description on the plan should be matched to the area use summary for woodland preservation. That's a note kind of clash that needs to be cleaned up, nothing major there. Note 14 under the development description should be clarified regarding outdoor commercial activities in a proposed IPUD. I'm not sure what that means, if it means outdoor storage for the uses, that will be fine, just needs to be appropriately screened for final area site plan. But when I saw commercial and outdoor, I thought what's being proposed here, so that's something you may want to clarify. A proposed construction schedule should be added to the PASP. And the property, that long, narrow property to the west is actually a real piece of property that's fee-owned by consumers. And the northerly half is zoned AA, agricultural, and abuts 2 residential lots. From a planning standpoint, we always try to see where we have industrial up against residential and make sure that we get the appropriate buffering and setbacks in there. Final design of the landscape buffering treatment will be determined during your final area site plan review for whatever lands up against those residential homes. One of the things that I think is important that is subject to Planning Commission discretion is the 4-mile frontage has been carefully designed with the Amazon project. I think that my recommendation is that we carry over that 4-mile frontage design from Amazon so that as you drive by these planned unit developments, there's at least some kind of consistency in the treatment along the street. And that can be shown in a cross-section on a final area site plan when we get to that point up along 4 Mile. There should be a statement of intention to subdivide either by plat condo or just by splits. That should be added to the plan. And if they have any proposed PUD benefits, that should be added to the PASP sheet as well. And these typically include setbacks, signage allowances, parking reductions, etc. So those are my recommended conditions of approval. Again, no deal breakers on there, just essentially an exercise in detail. And I did provide you folks with a model motion, which I believe should be the last sheets in your packet for both the rezoning and the PASP. And that's all for me.
Any questions for Frank? I just have one comment. This is the last big section of Northridge, isn't it? Yep. Boy,
With one exception, east of Bristol.
Yeah, that's the
well,
Engman
yeah,
Farm.
yeah, we'd never,
Yeah.
it hasn't gone through there yet, so.
Has not.
Okay, just interesting. Mr. Connors, your comments?
Frank, do you have this picture?
Yes.
The plan? Frank's gonna pull up the plan. I think that might help talk through some of my items here. On Lot 2, which is, I think, the question behind the question, and by that I mean, they're the lot that wants to come in here first, so I think that's really what's driving the overall PUD coming in for us tonight. So Lot 2 is shown with a really small amount of public road frontage, maybe 60 feet. And it's hard to see on this picture, but if you kind of drill down, you'll see that it's basically just the driveway. And I think what we're recommending is that Lot 1 and Lot 2 be combined, and instead of Lot 1 being a lot that's just for overhead power lines, which is what's shown there with those dark dashed lines, that should be in the form of an easement. Because if there's nobody there to populate that site, there's no buildings, there's no cars, then there's nobody that's gonna plow the sidewalk, there's nobody that's gonna mow the parkway and those kinds of things. If that is part of Lot 2, then those simple maintenance items will be taken care of, and then Lot 2 would have a much more reasonable frontage. And we want to make sure that when the special assessment gets debated as far as who's going to pay for what, we want to make sure that Lot 2 doesn't have the biggest lot and then the tiniest amount of payback on the special assessment agreement, because that wouldn't be probably wouldn't be the coolest idea there for everybody else that's on that frontage. General Note 10 speaks to that special assessment. There's about a $1,055,000 assessment that will be due when this either ceases to be a farm or when it changes hands and is owned by a developer. So that's really where that leads, is to how that's going to be split up and accounted for. We recommend that Lot 4, and even though this is a preliminary layout, Lot 4 should probably allow for some access to the back. There's a pretty substantial amount of property south of the power lines there that could be accessed for parking or storage or anything like that. And if the building is as wide as it can possibly be across the lots, that will cut that off, and we'll end up with some kind of a strange request someday for access to do something back there. It sure seems like it'd be wise to just have that be thought about now, and it helps them obviously because it makes more usable space. The detention for this site, when the road was built, we didn't do all the things that you would see for development. So not all of the infrastructure is in place, and the biggest thing is the stormwater drainage and detention. So we did what was needed for the public safety issue that we had out there, which was Northridge was a really, really long cul-de-sac, way longer than we've ever allowed or should ever allow. And so we made the connection to help eliminate that dead end. And in doing that, we built just the road. We didn't build sidewalk, we didn't build detention, we didn't get all the private utilities, the gas main, the power, and all that stuff in there. We left that for the future development, and we asked in our agreement with the Schwaliers that that development take place in a PUD, which is why we're here. So the PUD then would cover detention, for example. And in some preliminary discussions, we've said that we won't make them develop this in one huge piece with one detention pond. We would allow a pond on the north side and a pond on the south side, but that those ponds then should take care of all the lots on the north side and all the lots on the south side, leaving no room for another small pond here and there. You know, we didn't want to have an industrial park with 7 or 8 detention ponds. It's way better to have 1 or 2 at most. So the pond to the south, we do need to make sure that there's going to be an access point for that. It would be private, but we don't want that to be boxed out so that when it needs maintenance or when maybe there's an outlet failure or something, they got to be able to get trucks back there. They've got to be able to do emergency work, make sure that it's flowing. And so that would have to be accounted for, most likely off the east side of Lot 2, maybe down to the southeast corner. I think that would work well. On Lot 2, I think this is probably the one site on this map that has gotten the most thought in terms of what the site plan would look like. So we do want to make sure that there's turnouts on the southwest end there where you've got trucks parking and trucks pulling in bays. We want to make sure that there's a place for them to turn around so they don't have to back all the way out of there. Pretty standard kind of a thing for a terminal like that. Lot 5, on the north side of the road, we've talked a little bit about this here informally, but ITC, which is kind of the distribution or the transmission side of Consumers Energy. They're the ones with the big poles, the big lines. They are proposing to buy this lot, and what you see there in that square would be their new substation. And you see the black lines coming out of there. Those would all be power lines that go to the different towers and get spread throughout the system. Their thought has been that they will use as much of that property as they need, and then they'll spin the rest of that off later for a developer. So we do want to make sure that something is accounted for on the east side of Lot 5, because the likely owner, ITC, has come right out and said they're going to sell that. They're not going to let it sit there forever. So we do want to make sure that's accounted for and make sure that the master plan detention for that north side of the road is accounted for in that pond. And then along the east side of Lot 5, we'd like to get a water main easement. We're trying to find a way, without causing a whole bunch of burden on these property owners, we're trying to find a way to get water main from 4 Mile Road down to Northridge to loop that system. That's a project that we're working on right now. And much like when Consumers Energy came in last meeting, we don't want to charge these guys for this new water main. We think the system can take care of that because it's a system benefit, but we would like to get those easements in place to facilitate that. So we would ask that that be a condition of this review. We don't need it right away, but we would need it probably in the next 6 months. I think it's probably best to just note it as a condition if you folks agree with that. So, and then along 4 Mile Road, that's a very narrow right-of-way. The sidewalk that's shown there wouldn't be within the right-of-way. It just can't fit. And as we connect in that water main as well, we really need to have a 50-foot right-of-way on each side of the road. So what's been standard operating procedure for us is to get an additional 17 feet up and down that road so that you have 100 feet altogether or 50 feet on each side. We've talked to the road commission about that, and they certainly agree. They've done the same thing on their own site further east, where they want to make sure they have 50 feet of right-of-way out front. And then lastly, private utility easements is another thing that we did not get as part of the road initially. So those easements would have to be conveyed along Northridge. Traditionally, that's a 10-footer on each side of the road. That's for things like Consumers Energy lines, for cable TV lines, for telephone lines. And we would want to make sure that those are in place so that they don't have to then come in and get underneath the road and the sidewalks and take up space that we need for the public right-of-way. And consumers, you also see on there, Consumers Energy sometimes requests 12 feet. We're okay with whatever dimension that is, as long as there's space there for those private utilities. And that's it for us.
Okay, any questions for Scott? We'll turn it over to the applicant. Please state your name for the record, and if you have a presentation or can answer questions.
Adam Feenstra with Feenstra & Associates, the engineer. Yeah, I think Scott and Frank touched on most of the highlight important parts. In regards to Scott's comment with joining lots 1 and 2, that's a discussion that we can try to have with consumers in ITC, but I believe their desire is to own the land under the towers, not just easement. It's just easier for them to not have to worry about requests for encroachments and stuff like that. But that is a discussion we'd be willing to have with them. At the very least, we can probably modify some property lines to give us more of that frontage, even if ITC and consumers is not willing to go with a easement for those lines. Beyond that, yes, the primary driver of this project is the Lot 2 development. We actually submitted the final area site plan for that today, crossing our fingers that we get approval on the PUD. So you'll be seeing that in a month or so. And we did get our wetland delineation last week, and it was quite favorable for the proposed detention pond in that ravine. We did actually move the dike north, probably about 200 feet to avoid a delineated stream, because Eagle doesn't like impacting streams. So, but we could make that work. And then a lot of the other comments, as Frank and Scott said, it's just some paperwork items, some notes to add to the site plans, or some things to make more clear. But yeah, we are looking forward to kind of getting this in place so that we can see the next phase of development out here.
Okay, questions for the applicant? Okay, can I get a motion to open? Thank you. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion by Steve, is there support?
Second.
Support by Scott. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The public hearing is open. If you have comments regarding this project in front of us, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, please. Seeing that there is none, can I get a motion?
Motion to close public hearing. Support.
Motion by Steve, support by Scott to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Planning Commission. I guess, Scott, what he just said, the applicant said about Lot 1, that ITC would own that? That they would want to own that? So that wouldn't be part of Lot 2 then?
Well, I still think that'd be somewhat troublesome, but we'll have to work through that.
Okay, so there's no stand in your way issues on that one?
We don't want to see a piece of frontage that isn't going to be maintained. We have to make sure that ITC had a plan in place to take care of that, just like they're going to have on the north side.
Okay, then there is some power in the final area site plans to say this, to make issues like that.
I think so, but as number 2 is going to come in first, we want to make sure that they're not cheating the system by just having 60 feet of frontage either. I think the city commission is going to end up having to review the special assessment and how they want to share it, how they want to split that up. And ultimately, I think that's going to be up, in my opinion, up to the Schwaliers as the owners of the property. How do they want to see that thing split up fairly and equally? But then the commission would have to endorse that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I mean, it's a preliminary site plan, fairly straightforward. We've seen these, a number of these come through here. Any other comments or questions from the planning commission?
Well, I'm always pleased when the owners show up. It's, we get so many people that don't come and you wonder who owns some of this place. So I appreciate you guys coming.
Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I can make a motion, Mr. Chair, for case 22-027. I will make 2 motions. The first motion is to recommend approval to the Walker City Commission for the requested rezoning from AA Agricultural to MP Industrial Park and MP Industrial Park to IPUD Industrial Plan Unit Development for the 76-acre lot at 3410 4 Mile Road Northwest. So that is the first motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have support for the rezone?
Support.
Motion by Steve, support by Pat. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is passed.
Wonderful. All right, and I will make a second motion for case 22-027 to approve the preliminary area site plan for the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP revision dated 9/6/22, subject to the following conditions and based on the findings of fact noted below. Conditions of preliminary area site plan approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the City Community Development Director's letter dated 9/12/22, and the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the City Engineer's letter dated 9/14/22. Thank you. Findings of fact per section 94-2133G stated in the affirmative and based on the content of the PASP. The Northridge West overall IPUD PASP conforms to the 2020 Walker Master Plan and its business and enterprise future land use designations. As such, the project is compatible with the general character and intensity of existing and potential development of the surrounding area. Future developments, as shown on the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP, will be adequately served by public streets, public water, and public sanitary sewer utilities, and police and fire protection. The common areas, preservation areas, and private elements shown on the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP will create a unified system in appropriate locations with individual parts suitably related to each other, the site, and the surrounding land. The Northridge West overall IPUD PASP layout, design, and relationships between internal private streets and perimeter public streets will be such that traffic to, from, and within the site and assembly of persons in connection therewith will not be hazardous or inconvenient to the project or the surrounding area. The content of the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP and associated documentation suggests that the project will not create unreasonable amounts of noise, odor, light, or other external effects on neighboring lots or uses. Lots proposed within the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP will have multiple points of access to Northridge Drive, a major public street, with signalized intersections at each terminus. An internal and external sidewalk system is proposed on the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP. The Northridge West overall IPUD PASP proposes phases of construction. These phases appear to be capable of standing on their own in terms of the presence of services, facilities, and open space, and will contain the necessary components to ensure protection of the natural resources and health and safety and welfare of project users and residents of the surrounding area. And future businesses within the Northridge West overall IPUD PASP should not create unreasonable additional requirements at public cost for public facilities and services. The project area has been fully improved with major public facilities, services, and utilities.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve to approve the preliminary site plan. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Pat. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's passed. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I ask who supported the rezoning motion from Steve?
Pat,
Pat.
both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's approved. Moving on to Lewis Farms. Case number 22-019. This is a continuation of a public hearing, Lewis Farms West, 1500 Wilson Avenue. Rezone request for MPUD and RPUD and CPUD preliminary site plan review. I will note that the rezone request has been submitted to the City Commission and is tabled for this project. We then tabled on, I believe it was August 3rd, we tabled this project for further review. So if I can get a motion to remove from the table.
So moved.
Motion by Scott, is there support? Oh. Support by Mark. Sorry, I'm trying to think ahead. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is removed. We're going to handle this one slightly different. We've asked Brandon Visser to make his presentation first. We're not here to rehash every little bit of what went through on August 3rd. There was some highlights that he had to work on, he has worked on, and I'd like him to give his presentation and hit those highlights, and then we will have Frank address his remaining needs in his presentation. Brandon?
Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Visser with Steve Visser Builder. Again, here to talk about Lewis Farms. All right, so just to recap, this is Leonard and Wilson, northeast side. 32 acres, predominantly wooded, some agricultural, surrounded by mixed types of uses, whether it be office, industrial, commercial, a school, residential, and MDOT road, just for those who need a recap on that. Just to touch briefly on the history of this project, because it's relevant to the topics discussed at the last Planning Commission meeting. We had a meeting originally back in February with staff, Walker staff, planning was present, PD, fire department, MDOT representatives were present, Grand Rapids Water, and our engineers. We talked about the RPUD, the CPUD proposed uses that pretty much have stayed exactly the same as they are proposed today. Staff noted that the gas station was indeed proposed on this site in past years, but seems to be a conducive location for this at the currently proposed plan that we had. MDOT had made some indications to us at that time, mostly pertaining to the Wilson entrance that is lining up with that school drive. So there's a curb cut on the west side of Wilson. We want to line up with that. That was a preliminary requirement, and obviously more to come with the further we get with this project and the investigations we do. After meeting with staff, it was suggested we have a neighborhood meeting. We held one in July. The planning director had given us a list of addresses for all the necessary invitees. We had a pretty decent turnout. Neighbors began with obviously some reservations towards the new development and what we were proposing, but after a good amount of discussion and dialogue with them, almost all, most, if not all, had come to support the idea of something like this for an alternative type of housing as opposed to a traditional neighborhood of single-family homes, just because it is geared to townhomes, which I'll talk about kind of the building scope later. Residents were also eagerly anticipating some improvements on that Wilson-Leonard intersection. Obviously, there's been issues with that in the past. They wanted to see them addressed, but they did agree that this could be a great project to spearpoint some of those improvements and hopefully create a better intersection, or at least leave it better than what we had when we started. Just to highlight some of the planning director notes from the last planning commission, I just wanted to touch on the planning director found general compatibility and consistency with the master plan with the proposed uses, as stated in her report and memo that she sent out. All in all, that was really just there for, I included some of the slides just for reference and conversations if we have them at a later time. So I'm trying to breeze through them as fast as I can for you guys. Also noted on there was that the planning commission, or the planning director, had stated that the commercial land uses proposed generally achieve the neighborhood scale commercial land uses that are consistent with the master plan, because we're shooting for something that's not on the higher end of impact in that area, and that also works well with neighborhoods, residences, as opposed to just being something that's on a commercial site right downtown Ferndale. We want this to be a transitional property with some different types of uses that are beneficial to the surrounding areas. There was quite a bit of discussion last planning commission about the outlot number 2, which had a drive-through indicated on it. I blew that picture up on here just to show it is mostly designed or even referenced in the site plan as a more of a secondary type drive-through. Lower impact. We're not shooting for one of your primary high impact type drive-throughs, whether that be a fast food restaurant or something to a grander scale. The idea is that a lot of businesses are going to a drive-through window for coffee, donuts, subs, things like that. That seems like it could be a good fit. We don't know if it's going to be. Nothing's being applied for today for that final area site plan for that site. We don't have anyone lined up for that, but if it was favorable with the planning commission, at least we have it as an option for something that could complement that corner. But obviously that will be totally up to the planning commission per the notes on the site plan that you guys have full jurisdiction to appropriate a good design for that location as far as that drive-through is concerned. At the last planning commission, overall, it was on August 3. I did receive pretty good feedback from you guys, and a lot of it was positive. We did talk about the drive-through a fair amount. and also the planning director recommended that the planning commission forward a favorable recommendation to the city commission for the rezone. That did go into effect. You guys voted on that unanimously to approve essentially what we were proposing with some reservations on the PASP, which is why we're here today, to iron out some of those things that we have changed on the site plan to accommodate those concerns. In regards to the current plans being proposed and the uses, we did also receive some positive feedback from the city commission when it did go there for rezone. That resulted from it was on August 22. We did receive some kind of feedback from them indicating that it seemed as though the uses were fitting for the site. Touching after that planning commission meeting, we received 22 line items from staff and the engineer for things that needed to be addressed on the site plan. After that, we spent a good amount of time taking care of those necessary corrections. We went through line by line. I'm not going to do that now, but if we want to talk about any of them at a later time, I have them available just to show that we have gone through those very thoroughly. And then we've updated the site plan, all of which is reflected on the one that was shown to you today. Touching on, that was the planner's notes on the previous slide. These are the engineer comments. So also addressing his concerns on the site. We've collaborated with Dave Visser, the neighbor on the east side, and unanimously agreed to the location for the connection to the parcel to the east. It's located about 800 feet north of Leonard Street. Dave doesn't have any currently plans submitted to Walker for that development of that site. We don't know if he's going to. We don't know when he's going to or if he's going to. So we're working off of the fact that that access would be available to him in the future. We're trying to be as collaborative as we can for a functioning site in the end. We just don't know what his is going to look like, and I don't really have a good answer for you on when that would be. It's also noted on the plan on page 2 of 6 that the Leonard entrance would need to align with the existing curb cut on the south side of Leonard. We have made that our entrance align with that. If it needs adjusting for the final area site plan, that it's fully intended to align with that entrance per suggestion. Additional engineering comments is about the traffic study. It's currently being amended for the existing site plan that's before you today. Obviously that takes time, and we want to be meticulous in the impact and the improvements that we're going to have on the intersection at Wilson and Leonard. So we are fully committed to working with the engineers at the city and MDOT. Obviously they're going to be back at the table when this is a viable project. Until we really get the next step, we don't have that viability to bring them to the table. They really don't do that on too much on a preliminary level, but we're eager to get them in the traffic study representatives and sit in a room and really figure out what needs to be done there to make this thing work. All the other improvements shown on the submitted plans are a reflection of MDOT's comments from the original February meeting. There was also indication of a small pond now shown on the northwest corner of the site plan. You'll see when the site plan's pulled up. Essentially, we are using for stormwater the existing pond that you can see from Leonard with the fence around it that was originally designed for the capacities for this entire PUD project. Since then, the stormwater requirements have gone up, so we're suspect to believe that we may need additional storage. But on a preliminary level, Randy Feenstra, the engineer, has determined that most, if not, or some, if not most of our site will be served by that existing storm pond. So if we need additional space, we do have an area allocated on the site plan for it. Also, in regard to the RPD private roads, the wetlands have been delineated since the last time we were here for the wooded portion, which is really the area of most concern where the RPUD is. So we have taken the time on the plan. You'll see numerous contours in the road to weave and try to, as meticulous as we can, try to take the path of least resistance and have very little impact on the wetlands if possible. I'm going to talk about wetlands in a minute, but just for the sake of the site plan, I wanted to, we can always circle back to this, but just some highlights I wanted to point out was that we added buffering along the eastern edge of the property, the entire thing, CPUD, RPUD, 3-foot high berm, 15-foot space trees per the suggestion of the Planning Commission, as well as some of the neighbors. We've curved the road again to minimize wetland impact. We've added numerous parking spaces throughout the development from the last plan. We've added a connection to the east neighbor, as I talked about. We've adjusted the location of our recreational areas to get them out of the wetlands, put them into more practical spots. We have a chart that I'll show you in a minute on what would be there, and we've added landscaping at the entrances and other things that I'll address in a minute. The overall building design, slab on grade. So these don't have basements. They're not going to be big holes for these houses. They're frost walls, and they're designed, and we have had them in the mindset to design with flexibility for the elevations of the final road and the heights of the buildings to avoid the wetlands or problems with drainage or wet buildings. This allows, the slab on grade allows us to set the heights at a spot with more diverse ranges. The proposed road and buildings that we will have, we still need to go out there and do site work. So following the PASP approval, we do a grading plan. For the grading plan, that will determine with field work all of the actual elevations on the site and how our development fits into that. At that time, we'll have the information in front of us and available to make better decisions on what heights can be set for those buildings to make sure that they're at a safe level from the existing floodplain in the 100-year. This is pulled from Eagle's map viewer. It's really made for like a high level, analysis of the property, not overly in depth. Our wetland delineation was much more extensive, but I just put it on there for you just to show you. Most of the site is covered with mature trees. So when people think wetlands, a lot of times they're thinking a cattail swamp with ducks swimming in it, and a really substantial or a really, what's the word for it? A high level wetland. And a lot of the areas on the site that are shown are little fingers or grooves through the woodland. And based on what I've talked to with the ecologist that was out there, most of that is just poor drained, poor quality soil stuck in the middle of a woods with no light because of the dense tree canopy. So it's really not, anytime you see a building that may be near a finger of wetlands, if you were out there and you saw it, you would probably have no clue that it's wetlands, but because maybe it's held water because of poor drainage, there's some trenching in the woods from 100 years ago, farming maybe, some of those things have just man-made or natural evolved. It's our goal that when we put together a grading plan, we can improve all of those wetland areas. So instead of having a spread out woods full of saturated soil, we can actually have higher quality wetlands by directing some of that water into localized areas and creating a better wetlands instead of more wetlands. The overall design of the buildings, this is kind of a recap in case someone wasn't here last time, but all the buildings consist of units that are situated side by side, not stacking. It's a low impact visual type townhome or rental community. There's a big demand for something that is more of a look and feel of a condo. We've built condos and houses, so this is right up our alley. If you look at the pictures, a lot of them look like a house. The idea is that it fits in with the surrounding area, so if you drive down the street and go to a neighborhood, it really looks and feels really similar. This also provides or at least promotes longer term tenants. So people that are really more rooted in the area, whether they're just moving here and can't get into the competitive housing market or other circumstances, this could be a better place to maybe set some roots down in Walker. As far as what we've done with our density, we've gone from 120 units at the previous planning commission down to 115. Obviously, we changed the roadway, we moved things around a little bit. That was mostly a result of that. So 115 units, somewhere, I think if we have two calculations, 115, 116, one includes a side office. So it ends up being between 4.28 and 4.32 units per acre. The buffering that I talked about earlier is shown here just for reference at a later time if you want to discuss it. But again, that berm is in place on our site plan on the east side of the property. Another thing that was mentioned was the walking path. It wasn't defined clearly. What is it going to look like? What's it going to be? To the best I can describe it, the goal and intention is to keep it as natural as possible. This is a image that indicates or kind of represents a pretty good idea of what we want, a trail winding through the woods with little to no impact to any wetlands or cutting trees down. We want to weave it around trees, so the actual line shown on our site plan may vary a little bit on the actual installation of the trail, which would probably be configured for the final area site plan again. But just keeping the natural features of it and working around wetlands so it's traversable all year round. We want a trail that doesn't get too wet in the spring where it's only a 6-month seasonal trail. The intention is to set it in a place where it works all year. The walking path is shown on this. You can see it in the yellow, and you can see the green space reflected on the preserved areas. And that's pretty much all that plan indicates. This is a blown up version of the CPUD buffering. So one of the requirements was we needed to add buffering on the east side as well as the north between the RPUD and CPUD. So we added those trees. We've also identified that there will be trees between, yep. And then in doing so, we actually had to move that road over just a titch. So we scooched the roadway that goes north to the RPUD over to the west a little bit. The setback's a little bit greater, and the buffer in general is a little bit greater. These are the same renderings from the previous planning commission meeting, mostly just showing you concepts of construction. And again, we are here today requesting a favorable recommendation for the PASP to the City Commission. We feel like we've done an immense amount of work since February, and we've been very excited about our relationships with everybody that we've been working with and collaborating with staff, and we feel as though we've really come a long ways with fulfilling a lot of the things that have been mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. That was very well put together. Initial questions or comments for Brandon? Seeing none, we'll turn it over to Frank, and Frank can walk us through what he feels needs to still be addressed.
Okay, well, first of all, let me put my staff report in context. It was done in a vacuum, and it really may not match with what you folks have been doing all along on this project, and I'm totally aware of that. So the comments that I put into my staff report don't feel bad if you override them with your own interpretation based on what you've been working on, okay? The consistency with the master plan, that's up to the Planning Commission. I gave you my opinion. However, the Planning Commission interprets and applies and implements the master plan. So while you may see some comments in my staff report related to master plan consistency, that's just my comments in a vacuum based on what's in the document, okay? So I realize and recognize that this project's already down the road, and that's fine with me. So I don't have if I take my planning hat off, I don't have a problem with what's being proposed here. I think Brandon's right on point with all of his comments. But I will go through a couple of comments in this staff report, but I just wanted to get that out there as kind of a disclaimer. So in my staff report on page 3, let me just quick run through some bullet points if you don't mind. And stop me at any time if I'm going too far. The first set of bullet points deal really with engineering issues, so I'm going to let Scott handle those. Pretty much. I do think the updated traffic study absolutely essential. Remember, for years we've been trying to get a left turn signal from westbound Leonard to southbound M11. This, if anything, is going to hit the threshold for that. It's going to be a project like this. So we really do need that updated traffic study, and that would probably be an FASP item unless Scott overrides that. MDOT's already given you their feedback on that driveway. I think Scott and we started years ago when the school on the other side of the property wanted to put that driveway in. We were asked for our opinion, and we said no, because they said it's only going to be for service trucks, and now, of course, it's a full service driveway for all of their employees. And generally speaking, full-service driveways on M routes like this, so close to an intersection, are a bad idea. However, that's completely up to MDOT, and MDOT's given approval here, so again, I think I just needed to get that. I'm obligated to put it in my staff reports. MDOT's purview. If MDOT says yes, I'm going to go with it. The rest of the engineering items I will leave for Scott. Density-wise, I saw last time you guys had quite a discussion about density. The density is now at 4.3 units per acre for the RPUD phase. That rounds down to 4. It's consistent with the master plan. So in my opinion, you're good with density there. I do consider this a cluster development. I know there was some concern about it is or isn't, but there's an awful lot of open space preservation and wetland preservation here. And to me, it's a cluster development. They're proposing to keep that wooded path or that wooded corridor along M11, which I think is a great idea. It helps soften the M11. And they're proposing to keep most of the wetlands. So I think that's definitely a cluster development. A couple of comments. The street trees, I'm not exactly sure what was being proposed there along Wilson. I certainly don't encourage any street trees in the right of way along Wilson. That's an MDOT road, and I just don't think that we want to go there. I think what may have been referenced is what you see on the plan here, and that's fine with me, subject to refinement on the FASPs. I do think that when it comes to PUDs, we're moving in the direction and actually writing in your new zoning code the requirement, or the Planning Commission can require what we call a pattern book for commercial areas. And what that tries to do, particularly on a site like this, is have some consistency with signage and lighting and a pedestrian network and building materials so that it looks like a unified development. That's really what plan unit developments are all about, as opposed to just 3 separate outlots. You heard us talk about this with Vista 45, and you saw the pattern book that they presented at our work session, and I think that was a good step in the right direction. They came in, it's nothing major, they just say, okay, here are the patterns for all of the commercial components that are exterior on the site. In this case, it would be 3 lots. I don't think that's too much to ask, but it is an important corner. So I would say that that's something that, as these PUD sites come in for the commercial, that we should require a pattern book there and make sure that they plug in as these lots come in. I don't have a problem with the small drive-through. I think that's far less of an impact than the gas station. So I'm not going to get too far into that. That's completely up to you folks. But again, we just want to make sure that we put some pattern book together for our CPUD areas. And let's see what else I have. That's about it. I think it's probably premature, but I always raise this issue that if there are any PUD benefits being proposed, they should be stated on the plans. Typically, these include setback signage and parking reductions. I don't know if they're at that level yet. So I'm comfortable saying, hey, look, that's stuff that we can deal with at the FASPs as this phased project comes in. And the plan as shown, I'm fine with it. So don't feel that you're going to hurt my feelings if you just go with what's proposed on there. You're right, that City Commission did table the rezoning, and Steve and I are direct conduits to the City Commission, obviously. And what I'm hearing from them and that I support is that they would prefer to see a PASP come along with any rezoning recommendation. That had been our practice, and maybe we went in a different direction, but I think those two should really go forward together. It helps your elected officials understand what's proposed on these major properties. You do have a motion sheet at the end of my report. There's 2 pages there. You're just looking at the PASP, and just for the record, I want to state that the original notice on this site was for RPUD 2, not RPUD 1. We have all the notification in the file. It's a little bit of a stickler item that you folks usually don't deal with, but I certainly do, because our job is to build a legally solid file, and that's something somewhere along the line. RPUD 2 started being referenced as RPUD 1. That's not the case. The original notification was for RPUD 2. So we checked that box there from a legality standpoint. And that is enough. I will get out of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any initial questions for Frank? We'll have a comment. We'll have our comments in the future here in a little bit. Any initial questions for Frank? City Engineer Scott Connors.
Okay, my report was not written in a vacuum, but there might have been a wet, dry shop vac nearby. So bear with me. I don't know. I just didn't do it in a vacuum. So You've got a report from us that was discussed at great length during the last meeting. I really don't think it's important for me to go through that in detail. You can see in red the follow-up comments. Most of them are still valid because the plan really hasn't changed a whole lot. Maybe the two things to highlight, the importance of the traffic study. Frank mentioned that. You know, the traffic study that was originally done here was a study that was based on connectivity between this development and the Dave Visser development immediately to the east. That was all one project at that time. And then also Winchester Woods Phase 1, 2, and 3, as well as Shannon Estates. So we can kind of throw that study away because most of that connectivity is now gone, and these are going to be, for the most part, isolated developments. So the study really needs to be done again. And my thought is it's probably going to increase the traffic volumes on Leonard, for example, as some of the residential areas kind of take the long way around. But I still think that that left turn signal is going to be warranted, I hope, at Leonard and Wilson, and we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to get that approved. The other item is the wetland boundary is now shown, and that dramatically changed the layout, and that's kind of what we expected because we knew that it was pretty dramatic out there, and they've tried to work around that now. It's still difficult for us to tell how feasible this is because we don't know which wetlands they plan to fill. Brandon did mention reworking them a little bit. That's not going to be very easy. I mean, just because they didn't show up on the wetland inventory doesn't mean that they're not regulated wetlands. They are still, if they're regulated, then they're overseen by Eagle, and if you want to replace one or fill it in, you have to usually build 2 acres or at least 1.5 acres per every acre you fill, which is difficult and expensive. And also the regulated wetlands here do connect to other wetlands along Wilson Avenue. If you've driven up and down that road, you know that a lot of the forested area in there is really, really wet, and it also is dense forest, but that doesn't mean it's not wetland. So we would like to see some more detail on that in terms of proposed grades, how high are the buildings sitting, how high is the road sitting, making sure that it is feasible and it does fit. And then the one new comment on the plan talks about a localized 100-year storm elevation. You know, that's really critical for two things. One is to make sure that all these buildings and all these units are built high enough so that when you do get the big one, they're high and dry and safe. But the other part is for the home sites on the east side, which are Dave Visser home sites now as part of Winchester Phase 3, they've got a delicately designed minimum building opening for every single lot, and we have to make sure that those are all protected. And so part of that 100-year floodplain is to make sure that they're accounting for areas that would flood out here without any development, because that volume is still very, very important. So like you see a lot of times, we would ask for that pre-development 100-year and post-development 100-year to ensure that there's a zero impact on adjacent properties. And I think that's important to see here too. And that's probably okay on the FASP, but I guess I would say keep in mind that, you know, this layout's likely to change again as they get into that detail because there's that much out there.
Okay, any questions for Scott?
Well, I always appreciate your comments on wetlands and stuff. You know this stuff, and you're a resource in itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
No, I don't on that.
Okay.
I have one question. Scott, that Leonard Street driveway, what's that line? Is that going to line up with the street that's coming in from the other gas station?
Yeah, and I feel like a broken record every time I bring that up, but it's super critical that it lines up exactly because we've already got traffic backed up here past this point, and we have 2 gas stations proposed plus a whole bunch of development. So if we think it's busy now, it's going to get a whole lot busier. So it's difficult to tell from the plans. The Feenstra plans aren't exactly clear. It's kind of hard to tell. We want to make sure that it's an accurate survey, and we had asked them early on, many months, even probably a year ago, to work with AGO to make sure that that matched up. The Atwell plans that were done for the Come and Go gas station don't show it at all. And we always want to see what's on the opposite side of the road and make sure that those things meet up. So we don't want to be hit with a surprise later when they say, sorry, we can't line it up. We want to know early on when you see a plan like this to show that it does line up, not just a note that says we will line it up.
Any other questions? I would note that Brandon has said that it will line up, which is law and everything, but as I believe if we saw it come in as a final area site plan and it didn't line up, there would be roadblocks. So Okay, at this time, Brandon, do you have any follow-ups to what was said, or do we just move on and? Please state your name for the record.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Eric Lord. I'm with Atwell. We're the civils on the commercial portion here. And yes, just to reassure everyone, we have surveyed the entrance to the future gas station there on the other side of Leonard Street. So we have that surveyed. We know exactly where it is. We've lined it up on our drawings so that the driveways align perfectly. I realize that our drawings, it's just off the page, for the scale that we're using to try to give the detail, without zooming out farther. So, but definitely when we come back for final site plan, you'll see that.
Okay.
Thank you.
At this time, this is a continuation of the previous public hearing. If I can get a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, is there support?
Second.
Support by Scott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is open. If you have a comment regarding this plan in front of us, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you have up to 3 minutes. Seeing that there is none, I'll ask for a motion.
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion by Pat, supported by Scott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed. Planning Commission, couple of comments. We've been harangued a few times about that the gas station was not in the master plan. I'm probably I'm the longest serving member here, and as long as I can remember, and I've confirmed this with several other people, numerous other people, every time we've talked about the Lewis Farms since the previous development that put the water on Lewis Farms, Scott, who was that? Dave's development. Winchester Woods. This came into effect, everybody was always saying, yeah, there'll be a gas station on that country. Yeah. Well, when we did the master plan that Frank led, sorry, Frank, we neglected to zone it that way. So that's what the rezone is. I'm comfortable doing it because we've always talked about it. I don't know what happened. I don't know why that would have happened. It was always just, yeah, that'd be a perfect place for a gas station because you're on a main road plus the side road access. So I think if you guys have a problem with that, please speak up. Another thing that we had a problem with previously was the drive-through. I take Frank's advice well on that. I also look over at what we did in Westtown, which has some drive-through issues, and I think this is a low impact. So those are just several leading comments. Now I'd like to hear if there are comments from others. Steve?
I agree with you. I think that we had the expectation that there would be a gas station on this corner. I'm not in love with what I'm seeing on the rest of the commercial site, but I think that through the final area site plan process, we can one-off determine what the impact of those sites will be and determine what we're comfortable with moving forward at that point in the process. So at this point in time, I'm fine.
Pat?
I'm good with everything. The only thing and I know Frank brought this up about the full access drive coming out, that's a scary little position there. I mean, people fly through that light and there's gonna be a slowdown lane to get into the gas station, correct? I'm assuming there's gonna be like a little.
We need to see all those details.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
I
it's-
think MDOT originally had said there needs to be a deceleration lane for northbound. So if you go through the light, there's a lane that
To
kind
take
of
the right
ends
into the
there.
gas station.
And also a center turn lane for both directions.
Yeah.
So if you're coming southbound, for example, you need to be able to safely get into that lane.
Yep.
So,
I mean, I don't agree with it, but if MDOT says, hey, traffic study says we're good, at least it lines up with the drive across the street, but just because I see it now on the other side of Wilson, there's the one right in, right out. People don't care about that either. They go left in the right out. So I guess if we make it work versus forcing them to go over curbs or do a big U-turn into these things, I guess that's fine. It's just, we know we always have accidents right there on Richmond and Wilson, and this is another fast corner here that, you know, more traffic coming in and out of, so I just worry about more accidents, that's all in that.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is the traffic study is not gonna say safe or not safe. It's gonna say how congested is it now and how congested is it gonna be.
Yep.
And sometimes it'll refer to potential improvements that can be put in place. Almost never, it hardly ever happens, but sometimes the developer would have to put those improvements in. In this case, those improvements would be the center turn lane to facilitate that driveway.
Right, and the light signal will be, I mean, left turn signals and things like that. Is there any talk of lowering the speed limit on Wilson between, let's just say, from Meyer down to
Richmond.
Richmond, or even to the roundabout?
Zero talk.
Yep, I figured. If anything, they want to speed it up, move it up to 65. I know. Faster, better. Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you for that. Scott?
I don't have a whole lot to add. My thoughts largely align with what everybody else has said so far. I mean, this plan looks fine. I'd like to see what the final area site plan looks like to get those other details sorted out, but I'm all right with this.
Joe?
Well, this is a big project. I think we should go slow on it. Did I hear that's a 3-foot berm all the way around it? Is that correct?
Starting essentially at Leonard, as you go north along the entire CPUD, there would be a berm and a setback with 15-foot centered evergreens. And then that continues on where there's actually existing woodland right now. Once we get to that woodland, we'd stop and start preserving trees that are savable, essentially. So pretty much from Leonard all the way up to the tree line, we'd create a new tree line.
So when if you go from Leonard to Richmond, it's woods and trees on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not gonna have that anymore, obviously. I'm realistic enough to know that. But how much, what kind of trees, how big they're gonna get, what's that gonna be like now when I look to the east as I go up Wilson, what's it gonna look like?
Yep. So if you're going up Wilson north and you're looking to the east, there's landscaping proposed on the west side of that CPUD as well, and then also at the end of our kind of western cul-de-sac there. I think those, as Frank referred to earlier, with the street trees that were discussed, just essentially to create a buffer zone, because the rest of our site will predominantly maintain the corridor feel of Wilson. Anything that the CPUD touches now is currently an agricultural field. So there's practically no trees that need to be cut down. So the differentiation between what you see and feel now heading northbound on Wilson, if anything, will have additional trees, at least healthier trees than the ones that might be falling down that exist from the edge of the field from days of old.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Dave?
Speaking of trees, sorry, real quick. Speaking of trees while you're up there, because Frank had mentioned the street trees. We're talking about the street trees in the commercial area, correct? Is that what we were talking about?
I believe so.
Okay, because I know if we have that full access drive there and you got street trees, you can't see what's coming at you, so you want to have a line of sight. Yeah.
And that's
okay.
where, when we get to the FASP
Yeah, I mean,
level,
that's where we'll get more, yeah, and you mentioned that.
we'll have them put the clear vision cone on there,
Yeah.
and obviously nothing can be planted in that area.
Yep.
Dave?
This plan on your screen shows you the street trees on Wilson, and then the street trees within, or not really street trees, but the landscaping trees proposed within the CPD, and then the actual buffer you can really indicate with that dense tree depiction on the eastern side. So it's a little different as you go west to east, because I think we talked a little bit about west and east, but this could be a reference for that. Obviously, a actual landscaping plan with tree sizes, species, everything to come on the landscaping plan required at the FASP.
Don't go away, I got a question for you, Brandon. If we go back to that previous slide, Frank, for me, there you go. The previous time that this came to us, there was quite a bit of discussion that the density, that you bring it down quite a bit, and I thought there was 3 phases, phase 2 and 3. I mean, is it going to just phase 2? Is that trying to address that we won't be exposed to high density if phase 2 doesn't go in?
That wasn't the forethought on why anything has changed on the plan, really. There is a chart on one of these slides, we can reference it later, but that does show some density calculations for phase 1 and 2. But in essence, we're keeping the whole parcel together. So phase 1 is not going to be parceled off separately than phase 2. So as phase 1 gets developed, the density really goes down substantially to something less than 2 units per acre, just because we're having the entire phase 2 is preserved woods at that point. In the likelihood or unlikelihood that that parcel never gets developed, or that phase 2 never gets developed, it would essentially be like starting from square one to get anything to put on there, because you guys would have it approved for this use specifically. So it has to be this use, or it's dead in the water. We have no reason to split the property or to have large time frames between phase 2 and 1. They're simply in place for ease of construction, getting some things established on improvements on the intersection, and then working our way. Phase 1 is a little bit smaller than phase 2, so it was brought up that, that traffic before phase 2 goes in, how will that play into it? This does accommodate that a little bit better as well.
On the, let's see, on the drive-through, I'm good with waiting to see what's in the final area site plan. The gas station, it seems fine with me. 100 yards to the south, it's okay to have a gas station, so it's got to be okay to have a gas station here. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, now it's to see who can get it built first. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, thank you for comments. Any other comments? I think we've beat this dog to death. You have some, Brandon, you have some work to do on the final area site plan, you're aware. If somebody presents a motion, I personally would like to see an amendment to the motion to make sure that the driveway on Leonard lines up with the driveway to the south, just to mention that in a motion. So that's my suggestion, is if there's somebody that would like to make a motion, I'm entertaining motions.
Isn't that in the engineering? Isn't that in Scott's?
I think it's in Scott's that he recommends it, but I want it read into the record.
Okay.
That's personally. Now, if you make a motion without it.
No, that's fine. The only thing I want to make a comment on is in Frank's final thoughts, he recommended tabling this. I wanted to get his comments. Are you okay with?
Yes, definitely. I think you're ready, based on what I've heard tonight and what you folks have talked about previously. I think conditional approval for the PASP time is ripe for that. And obviously there'll be a lot of detail work that we'll work with all these folks on when the individual final area site plans come in, but I'm good with a conditional approval.
I would suggest on Frank's, if you say referencing Frank's report, just say that is amended by his comments in the record.
Okay.
So.
All right. I'd like to make a motion on case number 22-019 for Lewis Farms West PASP. Motion, I make a motion to approve the preliminary area site plan for the Lewis Farms West project, revision dated 9/7/22, subject to the following conditions and based on the findings and fact noted below. Conditions of preliminary area site plan approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the City Community Development Director's Letter dated 9/14/22. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the City Engineer's Letter dated 9/14/22. Other condition is the driveway on Leonard Street will line up with the driveway on the south side of Leonard Street, as agreed to by the developer. Another condition is that Frank's comments are read into the public hearing, that he is agreeable to not tabling this particular motion. Findings of fact per section 94-213 3G stated in the affirmative and based on the content of the PASP. Number one, Lewis Farms West PASP conforms to the 2020 Walker Master Plan and its mixed use and neighborhood node future land use designations. As such, the project is compatible with the general character and intensity of existing and potential development of the surrounding area. Number two, future developments as shown on the Lewis Farms West PASP will be adequately served by the public streets, public water, and public sanitary sewer utilities, and police and fire protection. Number 3, the common areas, preservation areas, and private elements shown on Lewis Farms West PASP will create a unified system in appropriate locations with individual parts suitably related to each other, the site, and the surrounding land. Number 4, the Lewis Farms West PASP layout, design, and relationships between internal private streets and perimeter public streets will be such that traffic to, from, and within the site and assembly of persons in connection therewith will not be hazardous or inconvenient to the project or the surrounding area. Number 5. Number 5. The content of the Lewis Farms West PASP and associated documentation suggests that the project will not create unreasonable amounts of noise, odor, light, or other external effects on neighboring lots or uses. Number 6. The lots proposed within the Lewis Farms West PASP will have multiple points of access to M11 and Leonard Street, both major public streets with a signalized intersection. Number 7. The internal and external sidewalk system is proposed on the Lewis Farms West PASP. Number 8, the Lewis Farms West PASP proposes phases of construction. These phases appear to be capable of standing on their own in terms of the presence of services, facilities, and open space, and will contain the necessary components to ensure protection of natural resources and the health, safety, and welfare of project users and residents in the surrounding area. Number 9, future businesses within the Lewis Farms West PASP should not create unreasonable additional requirements at public cost for public facilities and services. The project area has been fully improved with major public facilities, services, and utilities. Anything else anybody wanted to add? An amendment? Oh, we're good? Okay.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Pat with his amended motion. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Dave. Comments, questions? All in favor of approval, say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Approved. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Now is Frank. I haven't been the chair often lately. I actually like not being the chair. So that brings into question, one of our members hasn't been here in quite a while, Tom, and I feel for Tom, but how do we proceed?
I think the mayor is talking with Tom.
Okay, so touch base with the mayor if I'm curious. Okay. Other than that, any comments about the future here, Frank, or?
Well, I can get the mic on here, and Scott, feel free to chime in too, because you probably know as much as I do. Probably more. Such a bitter man. So what we've got is we'll have 2 meetings in October, and the first one's on the 5th. There'll be 3 items on that. One of them is just a sign for the J&H Oil on Walker. This is when I bring up the PASP and the benefits and all that. Normally when I see a gas station, I'm going to say the same thing to these guys. Let's work on your pattern book. If you want a bigger sign, let's just get it on the FASP. That way you don't have to come back and we do another public hearing. So you see that J&H Oil, I think they're asking for an 8x10 sign. If they design it right, it'll be fine. We'll make them do the masonry base and it'll look good, but you know, we could have handled that at FASP. So that's just an oversight. And there's 2 other plans on there. The Tidal Wave Car Wash is coming back. That's a complicated site. I'm not going to prejudge. That'll be up to you folks, but that'll be coming back. And then a medical office building where a bank, a vacant bank currently is on Alpine Avenue, and what is that cross street? Kingsbury. So they're proposing to demo that vacant bank and put a med stop in there. It's a white brick building, I remember.
Oh, no, down at Kingsbury, down between 3 and 4 Mile.
Yeah, north of, used to be Best Buy.
It's over by the Steak and Shake.
Steak and Shake, there you go. Yep. And so that will be our October 5th agenda. October 19th, you're going to have the FASP for the first building in the Northridge West project, the one that Scott was talking about, lots 1 and 2. They're hot to trot on that, so we got those plans in today. So that'll be a public hearing, and then we'll see what Vista 45 is going to do. They might come in, they may not come in. Obviously, I use the term iterative on that one. It's going to take a few reviews to shake that thing out. We have seen some revised plans. I'm still a little bit skeptical. Consistency with the master plan, but you may see that on October 19th. So we'll have 2 meetings, and I'll keep you folks apprised. If you have any questions or concerns, just give me a call. Our deadline is October 3rd to close for the new planning director posting. So hopefully we'll get a decent group to interview, and we may ask the chair or the vice chair to sit in if we get second interviews. We want to make sure we get the right person, and we're really looking for someone with an AICP and who has experience. The last 2, we took a gamble on people who really didn't have a lot of experience, but I think based on where we're at now, you've got a new master plan, we're building towards a new zoning code, all that stuff's going to be in place. I think it'd be much better for the city if we can find someone with experience and credentials.
What's that starting salary for that job?
Well, the range is from 75 to 97, I believe. And one of the things that I'm big on is, especially in the job market now, you can't stick your head in the sand, my opinion, from a management standpoint. You need to pay people what they're worth, or else you're simply not going to get people who are applying. And Western Michigan is not a hotbed of planning activity. It's not like a major metro area where you have a lot of people come out of school. And I take a look at my hometown, Chicago, and man, there's so many municipalities there and so many consulting firms. There's just a lot of jobs, so there's a lot of planners there. That's not the case in Western Michigan. So
What do you mean we're growing?
yeah, you just,
New Zealand?
yeah, but that's tiny, it's
Grand Rapids is not Chicago.
or even Detroit or Ann Arbor. No, but there's a critical mass that you get with the bigger urban areas where, particularly for planners, where there's a lot of jobs, you attract a lot of planners. And there's simply not a lot of jobs in Western Michigan for planners. So you either are going to have to look for someone who's local, you're going to have to get somebody coming out of school, or you're going to have to pull somebody in from other states. So what we've done is tried to recruit in Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio to see if we can attract more than just our local pool, because the local pool is limited. A lot of people don't want to move around. It's once people get established, they don't want to move.
Are your
so.
pay scale, I mean, I don't know how government like this works,
Yeah.
but if somebody's really doing a good job, are they gonna make more money than the next guy, or?
Absolutely. I think what we've tried to do here over the years is make sure that we implemented, and we did implement, a performance-based review process, so that we're not just looking at the city as a whole and just giving out a cost of living increase to everyone.
Okay, so you are.
Yeah, I never agreed with
This
that.
guy right here gets noticed?
He gets noticed.
Not that way, though.
Yes. And
This deal's for new customers, not existing.
no, he's wrong. He can take it up with Daryl, the city manager. But what we've tried to do is modernize the way that we pay people here, because the benefit package is not what it used to be. No one has a defined benefit pension except for a few people, mostly in police, and very long-term people in DPW. So you know what? You've got to be market reactive if you want to bring in quality employees. And I think we've got the system in place to do that now. And what I'm telling people who ask, hey, it's a range from 75 to 97. If you come in with an AICP and you got 5 years experience and you can prove, that you're worth more, then we're going to start your midpoint, or above midpoint. And then we're going to keep you moving there.
So who decides on the salary?
The salary is established by the city manager and the HR director.
And the what?
And the HR director. And they use comparables through MML, which is the Michigan Municipal League. And thankfully, we're keeping up with updates, because with inflation going up so high, you need to follow along with that, or else you're going to lose place with people. So I'm pretty confident that we have a competitive salary and benefits package for this position. Now it'll be who applies. And we're going to be very careful. If we don't get a good group on the first go around, then we're going to do it a second time. So you may see me for a while here.
Is it comparative to other, like Grand Rapids and Granville and stuff, so maybe you could steal somebody from that?
Oh, sure.
Because that's what you got to do, is you want to try to get somebody who's...
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's someone who's local and experienced, we'll do the best we can to bring them in, because you don't want necessarily, it could be a real challenge. You just saw what Muskegon is doing with their city manager. They did this big national firm, and they cut it down to 2 local people, Jonathan Seifert, who worked for downtown Muskegon, and then their assistant city manager. So they went through all this national thing, and then they cut all the people who just weren't local. So, there's a science to it. I'm open to eligible people regardless of what state you're in. But yeah, maybe we'll get somebody local who's qualified too. That's enough.
Okay,
Green Ridge, what's going on there?
We haven't heard a thing on Green Ridge other than Scott can give me an update on that asbestos issue. But they haven't come in at all, and we're not searching for them. That's a project that can sit there, it's sat there for 30 years, and we're not gonna look for it.
and they tried to cram it through,
Well,
but it's what happens.
And Lincoln
Okay.
is progressing, it's getting real close to my house now, those bulldozers, and, yeah, they're getting real close to that final road.
You gonna set up signs out there and everything?
Nope, but I can hear them all the time.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
There is.
So moved, support, everybody